Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I wish firstly to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we are meeting and their continuing contribution to our national story. I very much appreciate the invitation by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute to speak with you tonight, coming as it does 2 months after the end of this year's monsoon, a point at which I think some view of our progress can be made. In offering my initial reflections and future outlook, I'm keen to provide you with as much insight as I can into the complexity behind this current border security operation of significant public interest. As you know, Operation Sovereign Borders is a military-led whole-of-government effort to counter maritime people smuggling. I work with a very talented team across the breadth of the Australian government, whose quiet, determined efforts are the wellspring of any success we may achieve. To them, I continue to be extremely grateful. Before we get into Operation Sovereign Borders, I think it worth reflecting more widely on the factors underpinning such a unique, complex and challenging operation. So tonight, I'd like to quickly overview some of the key dynamics in global migration and humanitarian assistance before looking at our joint agency task force and the Operation Sovereign Borders response. Please bear with me as I initially work through some important numbers. And keep in mind, these reflect the circumstances of people in this world we share. So let's start by looking at global migration trends. The International Monetary Fund identifies 4 key aspects of globalisation and the benefits it provides the international community. These are world trade and transactions, capital and investment flows, the dissemination of knowledge, and, importantly for this discussion, the international movement of people. The estimated number of people moving across national borders has increased dramatically over the past 50 years, from around 77 million in 1960 to about 232 million movements across borders in 2013, or just over 3% of the world's population on the move. Both the number and proportion of international movements continues to rise, as does the world's population, of course, which is estimated to increase to around 8.1 billion people in 2025. Now, to give some idea of local context and scale of movement, last financial year, Australia experienced more than 30 million cross-border movements by students, tourists, temporary migrants, as well as permanent residents and Australian citizens. It's estimated that by 2020, there will be 50 million movements per year across Australia's borders. It's also worth remembering that from the ancient dream time through colonial settlement to post-war migration programs over more recent decades, we are all in some way migrants to this great land, and together have contributed to the rich and vibrant story of Australia. Today, migrants come to Australia from over 180 countries. The current top 5 source countries for migrants, excluding New Zealand, citizens who are able to move more freely, are India, China, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, and South Africa. Nearly 1 in 4 living Australians were born overseas. By comparison, in that great melting pot, the United States, it's around 1 in 8 Americans were born overseas. Australia's managed migration programs fill skill shortages, help reunite families, and provide refuge to those in need of protection, and have done so in a considered manner for decades. Migration helps fuel our economic prosperity, our rich cultural diversity, our security, and our capacity to innovate in an increasingly complex and competitive world. It seems reasonable to conclude that migration will continue to be a very significant part of Australia's future. Humanitarian assistance to people in need is an important element of the larger story of human movement. Since 1960, when UNHCR estimates the refugee population on the planet was 1.6 million people, numbers rose steadily to a high point of 17.8 million people in 1992, before declining again. Since 1996, the total refugee population on the planet has hovered between 10 and 12 million people. But it's important to note that these figures relate to refugees only and do not include internally displaced persons. When looking more broadly to include those internally displaced persons, asylum seekers and other vulnerable people, UNHCR data indicates that there's been a substantial trend increase in the number of displaced persons since the most recent global low in 2003 of 14.8 million people displaced to a staggering 35.8 million people in 2012 are in some way displaced. These numbers are well beyond the capacity of any one country or group of countries to support. A sustained and multifaceted international effort is essential. Australia has long been committed to this broader effort. We have a proud history as a compassionate refugee resettlement country, with a resettlement program long considered one of the best in the world. This can sometimes be lost in the public debate. But the facts are impressive. Since 1945, Australia has accepted more than 800,000 refugees into our community. Australia, along with the United States and Canada, consistently rates as one of the top 3 countries in the world for the resettlement of UNHCR-referred refugees. Between our 3 countries, we contribute around 80% of global resettlement places each year. In per capita terms, Australia also compares favourably. In 2012, for example, one person was granted protection in the European Union for every 4,800 Europeans, while in Australia, one person was granted protection for every 1,700 Australians. This is a much smaller socio-economic base from which each refugee is supported. Of course, annual resettlement programs such as these pale in scale to the acute strain that large refugee flows place on the country's neighbouring conflict, such as present-day Lebanon, Turkey and Pakistan. UNHCR's resettlement program in 2012, involving only 22 participating countries, generally contributes to resettling less than 1% of the world's refugees each year, with between 75 to 90% of refugees remaining in their region of origin. Against this background of a world on the move in unprecedented numbers, many interrelated factors have an impact on the pathways and behaviour of migrants, including those of asylum seekers and refugees. Understanding the interplay of these factors, commonly characterised as push, pull and enabling, has informed the implementation of Operation Sovereign Borders. Push factors include the difficult or uncertain political, security and economic conditions in origin countries. Pull factors include asylum seeker policies in destination countries and perceptions of destination countries' acceptance of refugees. And enabling factors that facilitate people movement include modern transportation and communication networks, as well as the significant and growing prevalence of unregulated actors and criminals, such as people smugglers, opportunistically exploiting a global market. Some push factors can be overwhelming, real and ever-present. Large-scale conflict, as we are seeing in Syria, is a case in point. Just a few years ago, Syria was one of the world's largest host countries of refugees, mainly from Iraq, whereas now it is the world's largest source country of asylum seekers. Many enabling factors, related often to global mega trends, are generally not susceptible to influence and are often beyond the control of any single nation, institution or regulatory system. Likewise, many of the pull factors reflect enduring large-scale and historic circumstance. There are, however, exceptions to these more general observations, and it is in the smaller and more important spaces that Operation Sovereign Borders has sought to work to bring about change. In this respect, it is important to acknowledge the comments of our neighbours that pull factors have, to some degree, influenced the views of potential legal immigrants, as well as the opportunistic and exploitative behaviours of people smugglers. When people smugglers dominate a migration pathway, some very negative consequences emerge. Drawing on work undertaken by the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, I would emphasise 5. First, there is the loss of thousands of lives at sea over many years and in many locations, including off the coasts of the United States, Italy, Greece, Spain, Malta, Thailand, Indonesia and Australia. Secondly, there's the significant vulnerability, hardship and exploitation experienced by people at the hands of people smugglers. Third, there is the opportunity cost to the most destitute refugees, whose poverty makes them an unattractive business proposition to people smugglers. Such people typically miss out on resettlement when countries are focused on assisting those who have been smuggled. Fourth, there's the erosion of confidence in institutions due to the difficulties in managing the nexus between unregulated migration, managed migration and border security, as has been particularly the issue in Europe in recent years. Finally, there is the challenge of maintaining and promoting bilateral and regional relationships strained from time to time by irregular migrant flows and by counter-people smuggling operations, as has on occasion been the case in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean and Southeast Asian regions. If by now your head is spinning, welcome to my world. There are many actors, interests and challenges, sometimes cooperating, often conflicting. And all these need to be considered in seeking to counter maritime people smuggling within a more complex human story played out in legal, diplomatic, security and humanitarian terms. In September of last year, the newly elected government adopted a joint agency task force approach to dealing with people smugglers. In doing so, it's important to note that the departments and agencies within the portfolio responsibilities of the Ministers for Immigration, Defence, Foreign Affairs and the Attorney-General all have significant responsibilities in countering people smuggling, and other agencies under other ministers have a contributing interest in the matter. The great benefit of at least temporarily adopting a joint agency task force approach under a minister tasked to coordinate across government is that it connects all aspects of Australia's response and sharply focuses attention on how to get to where we want to be. It allows an accountable, integrated, systemic response to a systemic problem. I work in close cooperation with departmental and agency heads and see my role as facilitating new models to counter people smuggling. Innovation is essential. Any initiative within the bounds of law and safety that might deter or disrupt the smuggler trade is carefully considered. I would encourage more attention be focused on the systemic nature and utility of the Joint Agency Task Force approach, rather than from which institution its leader is appointed. there is, I think, much being achieved by a very productive, collaborative effort. To stop maritime people smuggling to Australia, my team and I are trying to counter transnational criminal syndicates. The system they have put in place is complex, adaptive and insidious, undermining institutions, promoting corruption and exploiting desperate people. To break that system, we have applied a wide range of complementary measures. No one measure is sufficient. We work with partners in our region and with source countries to deter, disrupt and prosecute smugglers, to improve border control measures and inform potential legal immigrants of both Australian policies and the dangers they expose themselves to by doing business with people smugglers. We look to make recommendations to government regarding policy settings on pull or enabling factors, to discourage the use of irregular pathways and emphasise the use of our managed migration program. We also work with the governments of Papua New Guinea and Nauru to assist their processing of transferees in the Manus and Nauru offshore processing centres. We've greatly appreciated the cooperation and complementary efforts of many countries. And where it matters most, on the water, I have sought to carefully manage release of information to protect our people and avoid assisting smugglers. Now, for those interested in the progressive release of information which is no longer operationally sensitive, I would direct you to the Operation Sovereign Borders website. To put it simply, we've been trying to squeeze the people smuggling system everywhere and in every way we can. By late last year, we saw the number of boats arriving in Australia reduced from a mid-year high of 48 in July to just 5 in each of October and November. In this effort, I acknowledge in particular the work of Malaysia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Papua New Guinea and Nauru, and of course the policy settings of both the current and former Australian governments. I was always very sceptical, though, as to whether, without doing more, we would have gotten below an average of about 1 boat a week. Unfortunately, there are too many prospective travellers susceptible to believing that Nauru is a town in Australia. It isn't, or any other variation of the smuggler lie. But you might say 1 boat a week is manageable for a large, wealthy country like Australia. Unfortunately, it isn't when they are being sent by profiteering criminals. Some simple mathematics is instructive. Just 1 boat a week, 52 weeks a year, 50 people on a boat equates to 2,600 people a year. Should 50 boats a year arrive in Australia, we know from recent experience that many more would follow. The numbers on the move globally are so large and the profits to be made so attractive that both smugglers and travellers would not stop, indeed did not stop, at 50 boats a year. Furthermore, it is unreasonable, I suggest, to assume in our planning that the governments of Papua New Guinea and Nauru would simply keep accepting 50 boatloads of transferees into their offshore processing centres each year, year after year. Eventually, perhaps very quickly, these nations may no longer be prepared to provide settlement options to a continuing flow of transferees. Nauru, after all, has a population of only 10,000 citizens. So, from mid-December, as an additional measure, we have turned back boats where it is safe to do so. We have established safe and lawful operational procedures consistent with our international obligations and domestic laws, and ensured a safe platform for return on each occasion. Since then, our efforts have focused on safely turning back boats on the water, supporting Papua New Guinea and Nauru in their efforts to provide refugee status determination and settlement solutions, and continuing our upstream efforts to deter and disrupt smugglers inform prospective travellers and support partner governments manage a shared problem. The result to date has been people smuggling ventures to Australia have failed, and there is a very significant decline in the willingness of potential illegal immigrants to travel. There has also been no discernible post-monsoon surge. To use the smuggler vernacular, the way to Australia is closed. And many, if not all, smugglers and potential illegal immigrants know this. But people smugglers are opportunistic, organised criminals who do and will exploit any vulnerability in or easing of our border security arrangements. And they have shown resilience and a capacity to innovate in attempts to entice new clients and circumvent current measures. Prospective clients are also looking for policy or operational changes before risking their lives and money on a boat to Australia. At present, the great majority have decided to wait and see. Australia has seized the initiative from the people smugglers. But to modify a well-known and very apt phrase, the price of border security is eternal vigilance. Unwavering determination to stay the course is now essential. While the boats are stopping with the flow very significantly diminished, the job isn't done. There will be surprises, disappointments and challenges ahead, but we have come a long way. Clearly, the business of people smuggling to Australia is under great pressure, with much reduced prices, special deals, and some smugglers offering kids to travel for free. All this and more to put people's lives at risk in small boats on a large ocean. I want to make the point here that our efforts are not just benefiting Australia. Perhaps most importantly, the efforts of Border Protection Command have contributed to avoiding a significant number of deaths at sea that might otherwise have occurred. This is something of which our Operation Sovereign Borders team can be justifiably proud. The flow of irregular migrants into the region has slowed, and some, typically the more affluent economic migrants, have chosen to return home. That said, to date, the benefits, while real, are modest. Substantially changing the irregular flow toward Australia and drawing down the pool of potential illegal immigrants in transit countries will take years, not months, of collective regional effort. More and more elements of that effort are underway. In Papua New Guinea, and very soon on Nauru, we are seeing the first refugee status determinations being made and settlement pathways being developed. These are very important steps and reinforce the principal message of Operation Sovereign Borders. The smuggler's way to Australia is closed. Australia also contributes to work with the region to support border management initiatives in order to strengthen the region as a whole. Australian agencies support counterparts seeking to improve their own ability to manage migration in an orderly fashion. This occurs through assistance to migration policy capability, migration program management, and border security management. To conclude, reflecting on the broader global migration dynamics I raised initially, the ability of people to travel through a range of both regular and irregular means has never been greater. This trend shows no sign of abating. Much of that dynamic is of great benefit to our world and its people. But some criminals have made a living preying upon the vulnerable. Together, over the last 8 months, the Operation Sovereign Borders team has greatly disrupted maritime people smuggling to Australia. Business is down, but smugglers will keep trying because they hope to turn a profit. As with combating other forms of organised crime, our determination and long-term perseverance is essential to effectively dealing with this wicked problem. I hope that in time, Operation Sovereign Borders might allow renewed confidence in our managed migration program and provide some clear air for Australians to think and talk together about our future as a nation of migrants in a complex world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angus. That was excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for some question and answer. Perhaps I might begin just by asking people when they are asking a question, please identify yourself and please keep questions brief in fairness to everyone. I'd simply begin by asking, Angus, you mentioned more than one occasion there the need for greater regional cooperation for the future, working with partner countries, South Asia, Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Given the success of Operation Sovereign Borders, how do you see the prospects there?
Sure, thanks. Something I learned in my experience in Afghanistan and the Middle East was to embrace the opportunity for cooperation and engagement wherever it was possible. And in that context, there was a coalition of more than 50 countries. Some things weren't possible, but it was about focusing on what was possible. And across a very complex system, through our own region into the source country regions, it's about looking to how can we work together, how can there be benefit both to individual countries and the collective benefit by looking at a problem together. And I think that we just have to take it a step at a time and do what can be done, as indeed was the approach taken in Afghanistan. Thanks.
Yes. Question here.
Lisa Martin from Australian Associated Press. Lieutenant General, in your speech you talked about having safe and lawful procedures in place for boat turnbacks. How confident are you that Australian Border Protection authorities did not commit a people smuggling offence about a fortnight ago while turning back a boat to Indonesia?
I am confident, as I indicated in my speech, that we have safe and lawful procedures to conduct our operations.
Brendan Nicholson from The Australian. Lieutenant General, the Australian authorities have actually investigated and prosecuted some people smugglers resident in Australia. In Europe, we hear that the Russian mafia is behind much of the people smuggling that's happening there and responsible for some of the tragedies. Do you have any idea who is largely behind the people smuggling operations that were reaching Australia? And are you getting cooperation in terms of seeking them out and prosecuting them?
I certainly have a sense of the syndicates that are attempting to operate to see a flow towards Australia. And again, it's that matter of wherever cooperation, and particularly in police-to-police cooperation, is possible, or indeed information sharing that benefits the prosecution process in a country, we seek to pursue that, whether that's in source transit countries, anywhere along the pipeline, where we can disrupt, deter, and in some cases see prosecutions emerge.
Neil Jones from the Australia Defence Association. Given your ideal background as a senior military officer both here and overseas and a public servant in the bureaucracy, what skill set do you think will be required for the Commissioner of the new Australian Border Force?
I will look with interest to whomever might be appointed while I'm pursuing other pathways in my life, if that's the question you're asking. I'm sure that the government of the day will find a very talented official that can see the complexity, that can operate across institutional boundaries and can change culture and perspective that might be required. As I think I indicated in my speech, our border is a very complex place, and I only gave a few examples of it. I wish that officer well.
Thank you, Peter Jennings. I'm not just asking this to prove that I'm still awake, Angus, but I did want to ask you, you talked about the Joint Interagency Task Force as a model for sort of dealing with wicked problems. And we have also Angus Houston here, who's really been running one for an equally intractable and difficult task. Is it really believable, do you think, to imagine that we will sort of ultimately get to a stage where we do away with these models, particularly in the area that you've been working on for the last few months? I wonder if in some way what they demonstrate is that old public service or older public service methods of dealing with complex problems are broken. And really what the Joint Interagency Task Force model points to is the need for a new design for how governments deal with really complex and difficult issues.
I don't think it's so much as, and I don't suggest that current or past practices are in any way broken, but rather you need to perhaps fit the response to the nature of the challenge. And where we are seeing essentially people seek to navigate a seam between what are our traditional institutional structures, then perhaps in this case, I hope, but in other circumstances, an interagency effect may be useful. But what you, I think, want to do is try to find the approach that allows the problem to be normalised and to be managed down and contained, if not dealt with. And in doing so, you bring it into what might be described as the tried and true structures of institutions of state that have existed for 100 years and have adapted over the many changes through those 100 years.
Thanks, General. David Rowe from the Sydney Morning Herald and Age newspapers. When you took this job, Minister Morrison asked you to do a review of security at the Manus Island Detention Centre. You delivered that review, I understand, in November. Among its recommendations were the strengthening of fences along with other security enhancements. 3 months later, when the riots occurred, the department still had not implemented most of those recommendations, including the strengthening of fences. I'd like to ask you, do you believe that events would have turned out differently that night had the department been swifter in implementing the fences? And how disappointed are you by the failure in that regard? And is this something you have since taken up at any point with the department or the minister?
Thanks, David. I think it's important to note there were a wide range of recommendations, some of which have been, some of which are, and some of which will be implemented. But in terms of questions as to the incident that occurred in February at the Manus Processing Centre, I think it is more appropriate for me to await the findings and recommendations of Mr Cornell's report, which I think will further inform us in terms of moving forward. Thank you.
Anthony Bergen from ASPI. Thanks, Angus. Could you say something about the communications strategy that's sort of underpinned your work? I mean, what has proven effective? You know, is it social media or
Sure.
YouTube, or how are you actually getting the message across to the, target countries?
There's been a wide range of materials and forms through which we've tried to communicate the message of the government's policies of the day and of that theme of Operation Sovereign Borders, there's no way you will come to Australia. And that's seen us use YouTube pop-up ads, use video clips, use television advertisements, use comic book-like style magazines, small magazines, posters. It has been calibrated by seeking to understand those source communities and the best form in each of those communities that might connect the message, and then we've adjusted what we've done and where we've done from that knowledge. And I'm open to any medium that fairly informs people, because without it, the smugglers will spread lies, and they do it consistently.
Nick Stewart from the Canberra Times. You're a naturally shy and retiring person, I know, but nevertheless, the fact that you're speaking tonight suggests that you feel you have actually turned the corner. That you made the comment that we're into the post-monsoonal season. We've seen a significant decrease in the number of boats that are arriving. Do you feel that we are at the point where we can nearly say the message is getting through?
Thanks. I am speaking here tonight at the invitation of ASPI, and I very much appreciate, perhaps they were listening at one of our press conferences where I indicated that I would be able to offer that initial sense of progress or otherwise about 2 months after the monsoon, when we would expect people smuggler activity to return to the seasonal business as usual level. And so that's what brings me to the opportunity to speak tonight. In terms of where we are going, the key message is this is organised crime. Organised crime does not give up. Organised crime seeks to adapt, it seeks to persevere, and it seeks to wait us out. And we have to be determined, and we have to be stronger in terms of will and commitment to see this problem dealt with.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll wrap us up formally by thanking the ASPI team, Lynn Gosard and the team. Thank Austal again, Dave Thomas and the team there. Could I also note with appreciation the presence of Angus Houston tonight. Got a great international team, Angus. We're all very proud of Australian leadership that you're exercising with the ADF personnel in the search for MH370. It would be remiss of me not to make that observation. But to our guest of honour, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell. Angus, thank you for your address. It was very deliberate, very thoughtful and very persuasive. We're all the better informed for your analysis, and we thank you not only for the address but for the candour with which you answered questions tonight. We've got a very vibrant democracy here. We're all proud of that, and a part of that is to have our military personnel come to an open forum like this to talk about issues that are difficult, that the country addresses. And on behalf of everyone, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to thank our guest of honour, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, by acclamation.